Oops, that's not right. That's not what I wanted to do. Oh, I see what happened here. Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Monday. Is this week 5? Yes. Oh my God. Every term it goes faster and faster. How is that possible? Every term. They can't go any faster. If they go any faster, I'll miss them entirely. I don't know. Yes, this is week 5. Next weekend. Next weekend we have a 3-day weekend. So next Monday, there's no school because it's, is it BC Day or Family Day? I think it's Family Day is what it's called, yeah. So no school next Monday, so you'll get a nice 3-day weekend, as will I. Looking forward to that. But until then, we've got a full week of work to do, right? Let's see who's here. So Ryan is here, good morning to you. And Shania is here, good morning Shania. Abby's here, morning Abby. And Simrat is here, good morning Simrat. And Tushinsana is here as well, good morning to you. Right, let's jump in. So where we left off, okay, so this is what I've messed up here, hang on, I put my slideshow in the wrong place. I put both of them in the wrong place. Can I move them into here? No, I can't, yes I can. Perfect. Good. Okay, so now that that's fixed, we were talking on Friday about ableism, right? And that was a form of oppression that that sort of discriminates against or denies resources or opportunities to people with disabilities. And we said that people with disabilities are a very diverse group. Some people have vision or hearing impairments. Some people have mental illnesses or developmental disabilities or learning disabilities. Some people have mobility or physical disabilities. And of course, the person we're talking about right now in the documentary we're kind of in the middle of is Adam Pearson, right? And what's Adam Pearson's disability? He has tumors, but they're non-cancerous. And I think he said they grow on the end of his nerve endings, right? And so what does that result in?
His face is not normal.
Yeah, his face is not normal, right? So he says he has a facial disfigurement, right? Is disfigured, so it is, it's different, right? It's certainly, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, it's definitely outside of what most people would define as a normal face, right? It's a very different face. Yeah, so those non-tumorous or non-cancerous tumors are kind of growing on his nerve endings, causing a bit of a facial disfigurement. I think he'll mention later, but I think he's blind in one eye, and in one eye he can only see partially. So he's got a bit of a visual impairment as well. And his speech is kind of sometimes difficult to understand, right? His lips are kind of really big, and so, that interferes with his ability to speak perfectly clearly. Yeah, so we can have all kinds of different disabilities. There's different people in this group, and there are lots of stereotypes that circulate around people with disabilities. And often what those stereotypes are is that they are kind of a feeling that these people are somehow less than the rest of us, right? They are less than human, they're less useful, less intelligent, less important, less equal, right? And those ideas kind of affect these people's lives in a significant way. Maybe I'm just going to jump forward here. So, I mean, if we think about Adam. Adam looks quite different from your average person. I think we can all agree on that. But now that we've kind of spent 20 minutes with him, is he that different?
No, his personality.
Yeah, he looks different, right? He certainly looks different, but he really only looks different here, right? If you forget about that, he's a pretty average guy, right? Pretty normal guy, walking around the UK, living his life, right? There's nothing really that remarkable about him. He's your average person, but his face is very different from what society deems normal, right? And so again, that has some significant effects for him. So we started off on Friday. We said, what social groups does Adam belong to?
It's male.
Yeah, he's a man.
He's white.
He's white. What's that?
Disabled.
Yeah, he's disabled, right? He has a facial disfigurement. Nicholas, what did you say?
Disabled.
Same thing, yeah. What else? He's white, male, disabled. Socioeconomic class.
Middle.
Yeah, middle-ish somewhere. What else? Sexuality.
Probably still.
Probably straight. We don't know for sure. I don't think there's any indication in this documentary of his sexuality, but I'm going to make a guess. Not that it's any of our business, but we're talking about these things. Religious affiliation? Yeah, probably. He's grown up in a Christian country, so even if he's not strongly Christian, he has a Christian background, right? What is about citizenship? Yeah, British, UK citizen, right? And I think we said that in basically all of those groups, he's in the dominant group, right? His socioeconomic status is middle, so that's not a dominant group. And then, good morning. And of course, in being disabled, he's also in a minoritized group, right? But for the most part, he's got lots of dominant group memberships. He's got lots of privilege in some ways, but his facial disfigurement is very much affects how society treats him, right? Because it's very obvious, and he can't really hide it if he can't really hide it, right? How do we see people discriminating against Adam or against other people with disabilities in this film so far?
They don't sit next to him in the bus.
Right, nobody sat anywhere near him on the bus. Not only not next to him, but they crowded around the edge of the bus. Right? What else did they what else happened? People with disabilities.
Even though if he's small, he's a bit nice, he's a good man, but first of all, people see his face, so it's a big problem.
Yeah, he's very much judged by his face, right? And we've said that, of course, his face is outside of what most society members would deem to be normal. But, there's also a little bit of we can also kind of understand it because that's kind of the way that we understand each other, right? We look at each other's faces, right? So when I'm teaching and I'm looking at Amanpreet and I'm like, I wonder if she gets this, I don't look at her feet, right? Her feet don't tell me anything about whether she's understanding or not. I'm looking at her face, right? I'm looking at the expression on her face and her eyes and what she's doing, and I'm reading her through her facial expressions and through her eyes, right? That's what human beings do. That's what human faces are for, right? They're for emoting, they're for transmitting social and emotional information. That's what our face is for. But Adam's is different, right? It not only looks different, can Adam make facial expressions? Seems like he really can't, right? I think his condition has created a situation where his face doesn't really emote, right? And so he can move his mouth and speak, and we can hear him speak, but he doesn't seem to be able to really smile or frown or there's no kind of facial expressions that we can see. The other thing that's interesting about Adam is because of his condition, we can't really see his eyes, right? And so, if I asked you what color are Adam's eyes, we haven't really been able to tell, right? And so I think that's another thing that maybe gets in the way, is not only is Adam's face different, but it doesn't emote, right? It doesn't transmit any sort of emotional information to us, and we can't even kind of look him in the eyes, which we're very used to doing. And so I think not only is he different looking, but his face kind of acts as a bit of a barrier to people interacting with him, because we want to read each other's faces, right? We want to interact with each other that way, and Adam's face doesn't really allow for that, right? It doesn't kind of work that way. That's a bit of a tangent, but in what other ways is he discriminated against?
The wheelchair guy was blurry.
The wheelchair guy was?
The lady came speaking with him.
Right. So the guy in the wheelchair, Dan, the war vet from Afghanistan, he was in his wheelchair at the bar having a beer with Adam, and yeah, this woman comes up and acts incredibly rude, right? Asking if he's stuck in his wheelchair, as if he's just using it for fun, and asking him to stand up and do a wheelie and stuff like. And we don't. Yeah, that's pretty rude, right? And you certainly don't walk up to people and tell them to do things when you don't even know them. Even if you do know them, it's pretty rude to just walk up to someone and, on command ask them to do a handstand or something. So incredibly kind of rude behavior, right? When they get to the bar, there's that other guy they encounter, and Adam, the guy's like, "Oh, I know you, I love you, come here, give me a hug." No, right? You don't hug people that you just have never met before, right? That's not normal social behavior. But again, because Adam and Dan and others are seen as less than, you don't have to follow the same social rules, right? Well, you do have to follow the same social rules, but some people seem to think you don't. You absolutely do, though.
Social media.
What's that?
Social media.
Social media. What about it?
His followers left, I think, because of his face.
Oh, yeah, I forgot. Yeah, so his YouTube. So Adam's got a YouTube page. Yeah, he's got a YouTube page, and he put up a clip of him being interviewed for morning television, which is pretty impressive. I've never been interviewed for morning television, but maybe. Morning television, if you're out there watching, call me. So I have my own TV. I have my own TV channel here, so I can say what I want. All right, so he puts up that video of him being interviewed, and someone says, "Oh, haha, what happened to the alien at the end of this film should have happened to this guy at birth," right? Which is a pretty awful thing to say, but it's also hate speech, right? And hate speech is where you promote or express hatred toward groups of people you express hatred toward people based on the social groups they belong to, right? So you cannot do that. You can't express hatred toward an ethnic group or a racial or a race or a gender or a sexuality or a religion or people with disabilities. You're not allowed to do that, right? So say the laws in the country, but also so says YouTube's policy, right? But again, YouTube seems not to have read their own policy, because even though it clearly states that's what the case is, YouTube said, "Oh, we can't find anything wrong." Look again, right? Your policy clearly says that you don't allow it, and here it is, right? So yeah, he's the victim of hate speech on his own YouTube page, right? That's not cool. Anything else? What else do we see? I guess we saw that young guy Lucas was bullied at school as well, right? Remember when Adam goes to the school and talks to Lucas, the kid with the blonde hair? Yeah. Yeah, he got beaten up at school and kids said mean things to him, right? So more evidence of discrimination towards people with disabilities, or in Lucas's case, a facial disfigurement. How do people respond to that discrimination or those microaggressions or that bullying? How do we see them respond? Hmm? Adam or Dan or Lucas. How'd they respond?
They used
They take it like in a cool way, trying to ignore.
Right. They try to be cool about it, right? So we see Dan probably has to deal with the worst of it, right? With that sort of semi-drunk woman, and he's pretty polite, right? Good morning. So Dan's pretty polite. He kind of explains, why he's not standing up and walking around. It's because he doesn't have his, good morning, Scotty. He doesn't have his legs, right? That's why he's in his chair. He's going to have a few drinks tonight. He doesn't want to be, unstable and falling over, right? That's dangerous. But, she's being really rude, and he's politely answering her questions as a result, which he doesn't have to do. He doesn't have to be polite to her, but he is. What else do we see? How else do people deal with these kind of microaggressions or sort of hurtful comments, hurtful behavior? So one, there's kind of politeness. Two,
They ignore, like the boy, he ignored instead of homeschooling.
right, so sometimes withdrawing or ignoring, right? So Lucas's parents pulled him out of school, right? And they homeschooled him, which I suspect wasn't cheap for them to do, right? One of them probably had to stop working or work less, or maybe they had to hire a tutor or something like that. It might have been more expensive to do that. And is that fair to Lucas or to Lucas's family? No, right? But that's what they did. Sometimes you'll see people like this using humor. They'll kind of they'll laugh it off or they'll make a joke. You often won't see people, though, kind of confronting the behavior. So Dan very well could have said to that woman, you know what, lady, you're being pretty rude. I don't like your questions. Take a hike. Get out of here, right? He would have been very justified in doing that. But why didn't he do that? He was scared of?
Maybe the leader might end up doing something in the relationship.
Right. So, well, it's possible that she might have gotten more upset as well, right? And she might have done something, right? She could have just, thrown a drink on him, and then he'd have to go home and change or something. So, it's possible that she would have become more upset. Why else did he not confront her? Yeah, there's probably there's some internalized oppression and internalized dominance happening here, right? So the dominance is on her part. She feels that she can, just talk to this guy however she wants. Incredibly rude. I don't think she talks to everybody that way, but she spoke to him that way. And he somehow feels the need to be nicer to her than he needs to be, right? That kind of behavior from her doesn't deserve any niceness, right? He should have told her to F off, right? That's what he should have said. But he was very polite and very patient with her, and I imagine that's a little bit of internalized oppression, right? The idea that, he has to be nice in these situations. The other thing is that it's kind of a losing situation for someone in a minoritized group, because if he says, you know what, lady, you're being really rude. I don't like the things that you're saying. Get out of here, right? What's going to be her response? She might get really angry, and it might be a big thing, right? What else might she say?
bad words.
What's that?
Bad words.
She might say bad words, yeah. So it might escalate the situation, right? What else? What's that? Yeah, it's just a joke. Why are you so serious? Relax. This is a bar. We're having a good time. Chill out. That's what you get, right? So then it looks like he's the bad guy, right? It looks like he's the one who can't take a joke. He's the one who's, gone out to a bar where people have a good time and he's being all serious, right? That's what it looks like. And so it's kind of a losing battle for someone in a minoritized group, because if you stand up for yourself, either people will get very upset and they'll push back, and you don't want to have a big sort of situation on your hands. On the other hand, they'll invalidate your concerns, right? They'll dismiss them. They'll say, "Oh, it's just a joke. I'm just kidding. Don't be so serious," and then Dan looks like the jerk, right? But Dan is not the jerk, right? This woman is the jerk. Okay, I think that brings us to where we were when we left off. Someone did we watch 20 minutes of that? That was 20 minutes. 20? Yeah? Sounds familiar? Okay. So are there any other questions before we dive back into the world of Adam Pearson? Somewhat movie star. Sorry, Adam. No? No? Okay. So online people, maybe what we'll do is we'll watch the rest of the documentary, and then we'll take a 10-minute break. So let me just have a look here. Just have a look at how long this movie actually is. So we got, interesting. Okay, let's do 25 minutes online people. 25 minutes, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about what we've seen. The questions and the link to the video are still in Microsoft Teams, so I'll let you search that out, and you can watch from 20 minutes. So we watched 20 minutes on Friday. Watch the next 25 minutes, 10-minute break, and then we'll come back here and talk. Okay, so do that, and we'll see you. We'll see you just very shortly. And same thing in here. Sorry, I'm on mute, but I'm back. Let's look at number 4. So we discovered that someone convicted of assaulting a disabled person will spend less time in prison than someone convicted of assaulting a person belonging to a racial or religious minority. So why is that? What's up with that? Remember, he had that little graph, number 4, he had that little graphic where, if you assault him, you can get up to 6 months in prison. But if you assaulted him because he was a religious or racial minority, you would get up to 2 years in prison.
Well, I believe that disabled people are like less common than people of color or within a religion.
Ah, okay. So one comment might be that, well, what are the proportion of disabled people within society, right? So are there more people of a racial minority or a religious minority than there are of people with disabilities?
And that would mean that the people with disabilities would need more protection because they're super minorities.
Right. So so the question is that deserving of protection, right? And the hate crime. What was this? The academic that he met out by the coast, right? They had coffee. He was a scholar of constitutional law? No, that wasn't right. Hate crime law, right. So he was a specialist in hate crime law. And he made that very point, right? Is that these laws are created because some people are deserving of extra protection, right? There's no special laws about assaulting white people because you probably don't have to worry about us, right? We're decently well protected. But racial or religious or sexual minorities or disability minorities, those people require extra protection. But interestingly, that doesn't seem to be happening, right? Because the prison sentences are shorter for assaulting someone with a disability. So there's a numbers part of this, right? If they are such a small minority, they probably need extra protection. What else might you say about that? Why might these sentences be shorter? Or why do you feel that it's unacceptable that they're shorter, if you so feel that way? Because I kind of thought, and maybe this is just my opinion, so you don't have to believe it, but you don't want to get into a situation of figuring out who is more minoritized, right? You don't want to start rank ordering people. But to my mind, people with disabilities are, in some cases, more deserving of protection because they may find it more difficult to protect themselves, right? So think about someone assaulting a disabled person and their ability to defend themselves. If you cannot see, if you are blind, are you going to be able to defend yourself very well? No, right? If you're in a wheelchair, are you going to be able to defend yourself very well? No. If you have an intellectual or developmental disability, are you going to be able to defend yourself very well? Maybe not, right? So these people are actually in, again, this is an opinion question and we don't want to rank order people, but they're actually in a much more vulnerable position because they may not be able to protect themselves just because of their disability, right? So they're being targeted because of that disability, and their disability will make it much more difficult for them to defend themselves, right? So I would almost say that they are, if not in need of equal protection, maybe even a little bit more, although again, you don't want to get into doing that. But this is a very vulnerable population, right? And for them to give a shorter prison sentence because it's a basic offense, not an aggravated offense, what kind of message does that send to society?
That means that ableism is considered not as serious as racism or what is it called? Like discrimination against religion?
Yeah, religious oppression or... Yeah, that's exactly the message it sends, right? not as big of a deal, right? Punch a person because of their religious affiliation or because of their race, oh, that's bad. Hit someone because they're disabled, not so bad, right? That's the message that it sends. And part of that is connected to what we saw on Friday, right? Where Adam was going around, oh, do you know what disableism is? Do you know what disableism is? Nobody knew, right? So this is something that people aren't talking about. It's not really part of society's conversations, and society doesn't seem to think it's that important, right? And shockingly, the law actually reflects that, right? The law sends the message that, it's not that big a deal, right? Punching the person, punching a Muslim person, that's a big deal, which it is. But punching someone with a disability, not so much, right? What's the issue with how disability hate crimes are prosecuted? So there was 3 things. So he went to see that chief inspector of the Crown Prosecutor's Office, which is the coolest title I've ever heard. Sounds like a badass, right? Chief inspector of the Crown Prosecutor's Office. Don't mess with that guy. But he points out 3 things that are getting in the way of people going to jail for hate crimes against people with disabilities. What was one of them? What was one of them? They put them up on the screen. Okay. Right. So judges aren't handing out sentences that are based on hate crimes, right? They're not doing that. So let's take one step back. So that's the 3rd one. But why isn't that happening? Why aren't they sentencing people for hate crimes? Yeah, they're not actually being tried that way, right? So when a case comes before a judge, the judge can really only rule innocent or guilty based on how the person is charged, right? You can't go in for a traffic violation and get convicted of murder, right? That can't happen, right? So the judge can only rule on what you're being charged with. And who determines what you're being charged with? Yeah, Crown Prosecutor does. So the Crown Prosecutor here, the lawyer for the state, basically, the Crown Prosecutor is not calling these hate crimes. The Crown Prosecutor is just calling them assault, right? And so when the Crown Prosecutor says, I'm bringing Scotty into the court here because Scotty is charged with assault, that's really all the judge can sentence him on. Guilty or not guilty, and then hand out a sentence based on the offense. But the judge can't determine what the person's being charged with. That's the Crown Prosecutor's job. So people aren't being charged with hate crimes, and why isn't that happening? Take one more step back.
Because they wouldn't ask if they had the disability.
Right, so the police, when the police initially investigate the crime, they're not asking about people's disabilities either. Why aren't they doing that?
Yeah, like it's embarrassing.
Yeah, they're kind of embarrassed or ashamed. And, I'm not saying that that's right, because police need to be trained differently, but part of that is socialization, right? And I can't speak for all of your socialization, but here in the West, again, we're kind of socialized not to stare at people. We're don't point out, like if someone's in a wheelchair, don't go and start asking them about their wheelchair. You're not supposed to sort of draw attention to people's difference. You're not supposed to stare. You're supposed to act natural kind of thing. And I don't know if that is kind of in line with your socialization, but yeah, we're encouraged not to do that. And so for the police, it's probably much more comfortable for them to not bring it up, right? To not talk about this person's disability, because that's kind of how socialization works. But that doesn't mean it's okay, because police receive training, right? They receive training in how to deal with things. And so one of the things they have to be trained on is how to ask about this sort of stuff, right? Sir, Mr. Pearson, I noticed that you have a facial disfigurement. Do you think that could have been a factor in this crime? And Adam would say, yes, I believe that is entirely why I've been targeted. oh, I see, right? Then the police can write it down. Then Crown prosecutors have the actual evidence to bring it before the court and say, Your Honor, this is a hate crime and should be, and that's how we are charging this person. And then the judge can actually hand out a sentence that way, right? So there's laws in place, but people aren't using them, right? And it's a bit of a domino effect, right? Police don't ask, Crown prosecutors don't charge, and therefore judges cannot convict, right? And if we want to take even one more step back, we might notice that sometimes people with disabilities don't report, right? So we saw Adam's friend Hayden, right? Hayden was in the bar and he had he wore his hair kind of over part of his face because he has a facial disfigurement as well. And he's been assaulted in the bar twice, right? Probably because of his face, because of how he looks. And the first time he reported it to the police, and what did they do? Yeah, not much, right? They kind of looked at the security footage and said, oh, well, probably never find him, I guess. And then they wandered off, right? They didn't really seem to do much, right? And the second time he was assaulted, what happened then? Didn't report, right? And why would he? Because he reported it the last time and the police were like, I don't think it's that big of a deal, right? And unfortunately, Adam had the same experience, right? Adam went to the police and said, hey, I'm the victim of hate speech on my YouTube page. And they're like, oh, well, you contact YouTube or you can just delete these things yourself. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, that's what you want to hear from the police, right? Like, you just handle it yourself, I guess.
But the police won't be able to arrest the guy on the internet, like he could be from anywhere.
They track your IP address.
But he could be living in a different country. And it's outside.
Could be, right? So it's very possible that they would have had a hard time figuring out who this person was, right? Could be, IP address. They'd have a hard time subpoenaing the records from the internet service provider. Could be using a VPN. It's all kinds of things that would have made it difficult to pursue this guy. And again, if he's in a different country, he may be outside of their jurisdiction, right? They wouldn't be able to charge him if he was, living in Kenya, for example, right? But they didn't really do anything either, right? So it's true, it might have been difficult for them to apprehend this person, and it would have been difficult or maybe even impossible to charge, but they didn't really do anything either, right? And they didn't seem to explain that to Adam. They kind of seemed to fob him off, right? So we have these things in place, but because of people not talking about it, not asking questions, not feeling validated, right? Not having their concerns taken seriously, we see that there's probably way more disability hate crimes going on than are actually prosecuted, which means that these people aren't protected, right? So Hayden knows, but Hayden knows if he goes out to a bar and somebody thinks he doesn't look right and punches him in the face, he's kind of on his own, right? He knows the cops aren't going to really care, right? And I ask you, like, what does that feel like to be a member of a society where the police don't seem to care and criminal justice doesn't seem to care either, right? Although Adam does mention that a program has been put in place and they're trying to correct this situation so that disability hate crimes are actually recorded and tried and punished. But still, what does that feel like to know that your group of people are not that valuable, right? This is when they go to the movie theater. What kind of stereotypical or prejudicial ideas have shaped Adam's childhood and adult life? So what are they talking about when he goes to the theater and starts talking to people?
That villains have some kind of.
Yeah, villains bad guys in films are often ugly or have a facial disfigurement or something, right? And he mentions Two-Face from Batman, the Joker from Batman. Who else can we think of? Bad guys who are ugly or scarred or something. Who?
Zombies.
Zombies, yeah, they're pretty gross. Who else? Yeah. Sorry, what?
The horror ghosts.
Okay. Yeah. People in horror movies are often, have a facial disfigurement or a facial injury. Voldemort. Yeah, right. Has some sort of weird no nose thing happening, right? Darth Vader. If you ever see under the helmet, he's very disfigured and burned, kind of thing. Who else? Who else?
The guy with knife fingers that haunts your dreams.
The guy with knife fingers that haunts your dreams?
That wearing red and black sweater.
Oh, Freddy Krueger
Yeah.
from Nightmare on Elm Street. Super, yeah, very disfigured. Who else? Who else? Who else? Even Thanos is a bit disfigured, right? Because he's purple, I know. But if you look, he's got scars on his. He's got a lot of scars on his face. You can't clearly see them because his purple skin kind of hides it. But he's quite scarred as well, right? We see that in Avengers 2. Who's the guy? What is it? I think it's in Civil War, at the beginning of Civil War, where they're in. Where are they? They're not in Nairobi, I don't think. But there's that guy that, he's got the skull helmet and he's punching Captain America with those like fist things in the market. They steal a biological weapon. Remember that part? Yeah, when the helmet comes off, he's all disfigured as well, right? So there's lots and lots of movie people who have some sort of facial disfigurement. Bond villains, James Bond villains, very, very common injury or facial disfigurement, right? Yeah, it happens all the time. And what's the message? People with facial disfigurements are bad. They're evil, right? That's how we know they're evil, right? You see the bad guy on the screen with a big scar or something. It's like, oh, that's the bad guy, right? So there's these stereotypical ideas that are circulating in society that people with facial disfigurements are bad or evil or weird in some way, right? And so, yeah, people, when they meet someone in real life with a facial disfigurement, they kind of react in that way. They're like, oh my gosh, maybe they're also, maybe they're bad as well, right? But again, it happens on a subconscious level. And it's important to remember that because a lot of what goes on in our human mind is actually going on below the surface, right? You are not really conscious of what is happening in most of your mind, right? The part that you are aware of right now is really only a small part. There's a lot going on under the surface. Ryan mentioned a pretty notable exception, Deadpool. But Deadpool is interesting because he's different from an average hero in a lot of ways, right? He's an anti-hero, right? He's the good guy most of the time. Sometimes he does bad things, though, and so. And he's not, because he's Canadian, and he's not entirely heroic all the time either. But that's his thing, right? His thing is kind of taking the hero stereotype and kind of flipping it upside down, right? And he's not the typical hero. He is funny, and in fact, I'm not even sure where like he and Ryan Reynolds actually. I don't think they're different people. I think they're like the same person now. But that's a stereotype that we see often in society, right? Ugly on the outside means ugly on the inside, right? Disfigured on the outside means something's wrong inside, right? But again, in meeting Adam Pearson, do you feel that that's the case? Or with any of the people with facial disfigurements that we've met? No, they all seem pretty normal, right? Like Adam just seems like a normal guy. Lucas, who we met in school on Friday, Lucas just seems like a nice, normal kid, right? Same thing with Hayden. Hayden in the bar, he seems pretty okay too, right? So again, but these stereotypes have an effect on how people are perceived, right? And how people behave toward them. So they do the psychological test, right? They measure for prejudice. Right? And so these kind of psychological tests, I don't fully understand them. I'm not a psychologist, but they are designed to, like they say, reveal people's subconscious bias. So they're structured in a way that you can't really cheat and you can't really give the answer you're supposed to give or you feel you're supposed to give. They're there to expose what's going on subconsciously. And I don't understand how that works, so I won't comment on that. But what do we see as a result of that? Well, in this case, it's people with facial disfigurement specifically. But yeah, so the original test, there's all those people on their computers doing the test, and it does show that that they do have prejudicial ideas, right? They did show some prejudice in their test. Then they go down, they hang out with Adam for a while, they talk to him and ask him some questions and play Jenga, even though he is the worst Jenga player in the entire universe. So, I'm just teasing Adam. And so they play, they talk for a while, and then they get tested again. And how do the results come out? A little bit better, right? And so, and that kind of backs up something that we learned when we read that article on stereotypes and prejudice and discrimination, is that, in part, how these prejudices get lessened is getting people to interact with one another, right? And the psychologist who is running the test is actually clever because he gets them involved in something that they're working together, right? They're playing Jenga, but you're trying to cooperate, right? You're trying to make sure that you don't knock the tower over, right? And so he gets them involved in a situation where they can talk to Adam, interact with him, and also, share, do something that has a shared goal, right? Trying to play the Jenga game. And it's interesting in that it seems to work. And it's also interesting because it's so simple, right? Like nothing complicated happened there. He said, hey, let's go down and chat with this guy, which they did, and let's play a simple game, right? Not rocket science here, right? Very simple thing, but the result of it was very positive, right? And again, they subconsciously, their fears that maybe somehow people with facial disfigurements were different or weird or evil or whatever might have been floating under the surface, those fears were kind of lessened, right? And so the subconscious mind kind of gets to learn that, oh, okay, it's no big deal, right? Adam's just a regular guy. Do you find, I'm going to pause there, but do you find actually as well is that the more we kind of watch this, the less you pay attention to his face? That you kind of it just becomes like him? Because I mean, first, when we first started watching it, it's like, whoa, that's a face, right? It's a very distinctive, very different face. But I kind of find the more you watch it, the more you just kind of see him for him, right? And you're like, yeah, that's what he looks like. And you kind of pay less attention to it and more attention to who he is and what he's saying and, maybe what a sharp dresser he is or whatever, right? You start noticing other things. And so, yeah, that face is very noticeable at first, but again, over time, it just doesn't hit you the same way. You just become used to it. And I think the people who took part in that little experiment probably felt the same, right? They were like, oh, just a regular guy, right? No big deal. Okay, so that's all the time we have for today. I'll leave it there. We'll come back. We'll watch just the last few minutes tomorrow. I have a few other things to show you on disability, on disableism or ableism, whatever you want to call it. And we'll keep going. So that is all I have for you today. Happy Monday, if there is such a thing. Mulder's looking at me like oxymoron. Not a thing. Have a good rest of the day, and I'll see you tomorrow or in 20 minutes. Okay. Bye, guys.